The dusk came down heavy, the kind that turned a frontier town into something close to a half-remembered dream. Wind swept through the single dirt street, lifting skirts of dust and flinging them against wooden walls, while the lanterns in the saloon windows glowed like half-shuttered eyes. Out of the haze stepped a woman, her figure bent beneath the weight of weariness, and a child swaddled tight in her arms. She had no kin waiting for her, no welcome, only the long stares of strangers. Clara May Jennings was her name, though few bothered to ask it. She looked older than her 28 years, her cheeks hollowed from hunger and travel, her dress clinging to her like a memory of finer times. In her arms the baby, Rose, let out a small, piercing cry, one that drew more whispers than sympathy. Men tipped their hats in mockery, women clutched their shawls tighter. "Too young to be a widow," one voice muttered. Another, "Couldn't keep a man, now she drags a babe into our town." The judgment clung to her skin thicker than the dust. She walked to the boarding house, knocking soft with trembling knuckles. Sheriff Amos Harlan, broad in the shoulders, cold in the eyes, stood there on the step before she could enter. His voice was like iron striking stone. "No room for women with burdens here, Mrs. Jennings. Best you keep moving." He didn't need to shout. The crowd nearby caught every syllable, each one a nail sealing her exile. Clara bowed her head, murmuring to Rose, "We'll find a home, even if the world don't want us." The child cooed faintly, as though believing her. From a far end of the street, a man leaned against a post outside the saloon. Luke Callahan, quiet rancher, 34 years, his hat shading a gaze that had seen too much loss. He was known for keeping to himself, drinking coffee when other men turned to whiskey, riding out alone at dawn, and returning with no stories to share. That night, he didn't step forward with any grand gesture. He simply watched as Clara bent to pick up the shawl that had slipped from her shoulders and dropped into the mud. She struggled, trying not to jostle the baby, but Luke moved before she could. He lifted it, brushed the dirt away, and laid it across her arms. He didn't speak a word, but the silence of the act said more than speech ever could. Eyes followed. Murmurs rose, Callahan staring at the widow already. Gossip wove quick through the crowd like wildfire through dry grass. Luke let them talk. His eyes remained steady, not on the crowd, but on Clara, on the way her shoulders sagged, on the way she gripped her child like a lifeline. He did not pity her. He simply saw her. The innkeeper, lips thin with disdain, slammed his door in Clara's face before she could even plead. Night was settling fast, colder with every gust. That was when Luke finally stepped forward, his boots heavy in the dirt, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Barn's empty. It ain't much, but it's dry." She looked at him then, wary, tired, yet with no choice. The barn was no home, but it was shelter. She followed, the baby quieting in her arms as if sensing some measure of safety. Inside, the barn smelled of hay and horses, of warmth that was not luxury but survival. Luke lit a lantern, its glow stretching across beams and dust motes like a fragile halo. He didn't press her with questions. He went about his work, loosening his horse's bridle, spreading a little hay, while Clara settled against a stack of sacks, wrapping Rose in the shawl once more. The baby's hand reached and caught a fold of her mother's dress, soft breaths escaping her lips. Clara exhaled long and trembling. Luke placed a folded blanket within reach, not close enough to startle her, just near enough for her to use. When he poured himself coffee the next morning, he poured another cup and set it at the edge of her reach without a word. She whispered thanks she wasn't sure he heard. The silence between them was not empty. It was a kind of understanding. Two people too used to being alone, standing near enough to feel less so. By morning, tongues were already wagging. Widow spent the night in Callahan's barn, the churchwomen said with pursed lips, glances sharp as daggers. Sheriff Harlan shook his head slow, the weight of judgment in his voice. "You'll ruin yourself, Luke." But Luke never answered him. Clara tried to keep her eyes down, shame gnawing at her, though she couldn't deny the gratitude pressing deep in her chest. She sewed a small tear in Luke's work shirt one evening while Rose gurgled on the hay beside her. He didn't thank her aloud, only nodded once, but in the hush of that barn the act was more intimate than any words could be. And so, something unspoken took root. Not a fire, not yet, but an ember, small, glowing, resilient. And no wind of gossip, no iron words from the sheriff, no sneer from the saloon could put out. Days stretched like long threads across the prairie, measured not by clocks, but by chores, meals, and the soft rhythm of Rose's breathing. Clara found herself at the Callahan ranch as though time had quietly chosen it for her. In the mornings she gathered eggs, her skirts brushing against the chickens' restless wings, while Luke hauled water from the well. Their words were few, but their silences held a strange kind of harmony. She would look over and catch him watching her with that still gaze of his, not the prying eyes of townsfolk, but something steadier, like the land itself waiting for rain. One evening, after Rose had fallen asleep nestled in a cradle Luke had cobbled from spare boards, Clara and Luke sat near the lantern light. The barn smelled of wood smoke and hay, the night pressing close around them. He spoke first, his voice low, carrying the weight of memory. Lost my brother in the war. Built this ranch with him. Now it's just me. The words came slow, as though each one had been buried deep and was only now unearthed. Clara listened, her hand resting on Rose's blanket. She, too, let her past slip into the open, a husband taken by a railroad accident, a family who had turned their backs, leaving her to wander. She didn't cry. Neither did he. But the sharing itself was a tenderness neither had dared before. Yet in town, their quiet bond stirred louder unrest. Sheriff Harlan made it his business to keep the lines of decency sharp. A man living with a woman not his wife, it's indecent, he spat over a poker table one night. The men laughed, clinking glasses. Callahan's raising another man's child, one jeered. Their words spread faster than dust storms, landing hard on Clara's ears whenever she ventured into town for flour or cloth. She would lower her head, shame burning hot beneath her bonnet. Luke bore it differently, his face a mask carved from stone, but his silence was its own defiance. Still, she feared for him, feared that her presence was an anchor dragging his good name into the mire. More than once she thought of slipping away in the night, taking Rose and her shame with her. One evening, as the sun bled itself into the horizon, Luke came back from town with a shadow on his face. Sheriff Harlan had given him an ultimatum. Send her away, Callahan. Put her on the next coach out, or you'll lose more than your reputation. There was menace in the words, and Luke knew it. Men could be hired to do what law wouldn't. Clara saw it in the tightness of his jaw as he walked the fence line that night, eyes scanning the darkness. The threat came sooner than expected. A stone crashed through the ranch window, splintering glass across the floor. Clara cried out, clutching Rose to her chest, while Luke rushed to the door. Painted on the barn in crude, dripping letters was a single word meant to destroy her, harlot. Rose's wails filled the silence that followed. Clara sank to her knees, whispering through her tears, I'll leave, Luke. I won't see you ruined for me. But Luke knelt beside her, his hands steady on her shoulders. His voice, calm yet fierce, cut through her despair. You ain't going anywhere. I'm not afraid of standing by you. She looked into his face then, and saw no hesitation, only the clear light of a man who had already chosen his road. The next morning, the storm came to a head. Sheriff Harlan arrived with 2 men at his back, the entire town gathering like buzzards around a carcass. Clara stood on the porch with Rose in her arms, her knees weak beneath her skirt. The sheriff's voice carried across the crowd, You've got no place here, woman. Callahan, you'll regret this. Best hand her over before we drag her to the coach ourselves. Luke stepped forward, dust curling around his boots. The sun caught the lines of his face, sharp with resolve. He reached for Clara and drew her and Rose against his chest. The crowd hushed. Even Rose's small cries seemed to fade in the air. Sheriff Harlan sneered. She's poison, Luke. She'll ruin you. Luke's voice rang steady, not loud, but carrying farther than any shout. I ain't afraid of loving her nor raising this child. Judge me if you will, but you'll never shame me out of what's right. The words hung there like a bell's toll, impossible to ignore. A silence followed, heavy and uneasy. Some of the townsfolk shifted, their gazes dropping to the dirt. The jeering men from the saloon quieted, shame curling at the edges of their bravado. Even among the churchwomen, 1 or 2 lowered their eyes, faces softening as though realizing the cruelty they had dealt. Sheriff Harlan's scowl deepened, but he felt the shift. He could not move against Luke with the town's mood turning. With a final glare, he jerked his head to his men. This ain't over, he spat before stalking off down the street. The crowd dispersed slowly, murmurs trailing in the air. But in the center of it, Luke still stood holding Clara and Rose close, the golden dusk spilling around them as though the world itself bore witness. Clara's breath trembled against his chest. Why risk everything for me? She whispered, half in wonder, half in fear. Luke's reply was simple, but carried the strength of mountains, 'Cause love ain't fear, Clara. It's the only thing stronger than it. She closed her eyes then, tears slipping free, not a sorrow but of a hope she thought she had buried long ago. Rose stirred, letting out a soft sigh, and for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach into the stares of strangers, Clara felt not cast out, but carried. And so the ranch, small and worn as it was, became their beginning. Not a grand one, not without hardship, but true. They would face gossip still, and toil and lean winters. Yet in the quiet of that evening, beneath the desert sky that had seen countless souls rise and fall, they stood together, three bound not by law or fear, but by something greater. Remember this, traveler. Sometimes the bravest thing a soul can do is love what the world calls unworthy. For in that love lies a freedom no law, no gossip, no fear can ever take away.